You're watching American Stars. If you enjoy emotional celebrity stories, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel.
At 65, Simon Cowell sits not in front of blinding stage lights, but in front of the quiet hum of passing years. And while the world remembers him as the sharp-tongued judge who shaped global entertainment, there is a side of his life that few understand, a side filled not with applause, but with consequences, regrets, and the crushing weight of time. Before the fame, after the fame, and somewhere between it all, lies a tragedy that is far more human than anyone ever expected. At 65 years old, Simon Cowell's life looks polished from a distance, as if every moment were carved out of success. From television studios to global arenas, he was the man who seemed invincible, someone who turned simple auditions into worldwide sensations. But as with many people who spend their lives building empires, the cost of that success came quietly, one day at a time, until it all formed a kind of tragedy that only becomes visible when the crowds fall silent. The story of Simon does not begin with fame. It begins quietly, almost dull, in an ordinary world where he struggled to figure out what he wanted. There was no sign, in those early years, that he would one day shape the music industry. Instead, Simon was a young man searching for direction, hopping from job to job, wondering whether any of it mattered. The world remembers him as confident, but beneath that confidence was a long list of failures that never made the headlines. And even now, at 65, those failures still echo in places he rarely talks about. Before the X Factor, before American Idol, before even the idea of global talent shows existed, Simon was simply trying to stay employed. Many people don't know that he worked in mailrooms, slipped into small music-related tasks, and tried to gather pieces of a future he couldn't yet see. These years weren't glamorous. They were slow, unremarkable, and filled with the kind of monotony that makes a person question their purpose. In that sense, the tragedy of Simon Cowell didn't start with fame, it started with uncertainty. As he climbed the industry ladder, the pressure began to build. The music world is unforgiving, and Simon had to learn that quickly. He made deals, lost deals, started labels, watched labels collapse, and struggled repeatedly. Each failure carved out a part of him, shaping the strict, emotionless critic that audiences later came to know. The sharp comments, the stern expressions, they were more than television behavior. They were shields, constructed over years of disappointment. And as the world applauded his straightforwardness, the man behind the persona was still dealing with the weight of everything he had lost along the way. But the world doesn't always notice these things. When the cameras are on, the lights erase the shadows. Simon became the very image of control, someone who could walk into any room and decide someone's future with a single sentence. Millions watched. Some loved him, some hated him, but everyone agreed he was powerful.
Yet power creates distance, and that distance slowly became one of the great tragedies of his life. The busier he became, the more disconnected he felt from friends, from quiet moments, from the simple parts of life that people take for granted. The schedule was endless, the responsibilities constant. He shaped artists, built franchises, and created shows that traveled across continents. But behind all that, there are long, empty hours spent traveling, waiting, rehearsing, preparing, reviewing footage, reviewing more footage, and sitting in hotel rooms far away from people who genuinely mattered. By the time Simon reached middle age, he had almost no time left for personal life. Fame and success came, but they came with a heavy price. Loneliness isn't loud, it creeps in slowly. And in Simon's case, it settled in quietly over the years, appearing in small, unnoticed ways. The public saw him surrounded by contestants, judges, hosts, and production staff, but real relationships, deep, meaningful ones, were rare. Not because he didn't want them, but because his life left almost no room for them. Then another chapter of tragedy entered his life, one that was more physical, more sudden, and far more frightening. Simon's accident on an electric bike was severe enough to change not only his daily routines, but the way he viewed everything. In a moment that could have ended his life, he found himself confronted by a truth he had long avoided. Success could not protect him from mortality. Bones break, bodies weaken, and even the strongest personas collapse under pain. The recovery was difficult, not just physically but emotionally. It forced him to slow down, to sit with his thoughts, to confront the years he had pushed aside. And for a man who had spent decades in constant motion, sitting still was uncomfortable. This period also revealed how fragile everything he'd built truly was. Shows can continue, ratings can rise or fall, networks can change direction. The industry does not wait for anyone, not even Simon Cowell. While he healed, the world moved forward, and he felt it deeply. For the first time, he understood that he was no longer the unstoppable force he once believed himself to be. At 65, that realization carries a weight heavier than any criticism ever thrown his way. There's also the emotional side of aging that Simon does not speak about publicly but cannot avoid. Seeing younger generations rise, new forms of entertainment evolve, new judges, new producers, new faces, everything reminds him that time is moving faster than ever. He once pioneered an entire era of television. Now, that era is slowly transitioning into something he cannot fully control. And for someone who built a career on control, this shift feels painfully tragic. Another layer of Simon's tragedy is the responsibility he carries for thousands of people whose dreams depend on the shows he created. Over the years, he witnessed countless contestants crumble under pressure, experience heartbreak, and see their hopes fade. And while the audience often saw these moments as entertainment, Simon saw them differently. He saw the vulnerability, the desperation, the belief that a single audition could change everything. Being the person who must deliver either hope or disappointment takes a toll, and Simon has carried that toll for decades. Behind the scenes, Simon has often spoken quietly and rarely about the emotional exhaustion that comes with the job. Not the type of exhaustion that sleep can fix, but the exhaustion of constantly carrying other people's dreams while having so little time to tend to his own. At 65, this emotional fatigue is more apparent than ever. He has spent a lifetime helping others rise, but in the process, he sacrificed many parts of himself. The world often forgets that even the most successful individuals can feel empty. For Simon, that emptiness emerges in the stillness of late nights, after long filming days, when the cameras are off and the silence of a dressing room replaces the cheers of an audience. These are the kinds of moments that shape real tragedy, not dramatic incidents, but the slow fading of energy, passion, and the feeling of being irreplaceable. The tragedy becomes even clearer when looking at the legacy Simon hopes to leave behind. He built an empire of shows that defined an entire generation, but empires shift. Audiences change, preferences evolve, and new platforms rise. At 65, Simon watches this evolution from a place he never expected to be, from the sidelines. Not fully out, not fully in, but somewhere in between. It is a strange place for a man who once dictated the direction of modern entertainment. And so, as Simon Cowell steps into the later stages of his life, he is faced with the quiet truth that everything he worked for came at a cost, one that cannot be measured in money or fame. The tragedy of Simon Cowell is not one moment, but the accumulation of years, the loneliness of success, the emotional weight of shaping others' dreams, the physical consequences of constant pressure, and the slow, steady realization that time does not give second chances. As part one ends, Simon sits in a life that is full, yet strangely empty, successful, yet deeply reflective, powerful, yet undeniably human. And the most heartbreaking truth is this: the world knows the legend, but very few know the man. Part 2 In the years following his accident, as Simon slowly regained his ability to walk confidently, something else began happening, something far quieter and far more difficult to repair. His connection to the world around him started to feel different, almost distant. The people who once depended on him, the artists he guided, the industry leaders who called him daily, everything seemed to drift slightly out of reach.
Not absent, but blurry, as though time itself was dulling the edges of relationships he once believed were unbreakable. This wasn't because people stopped caring. It was because life moves forward in ways that rarely wait for anyone. When Simon was younger, he was the center of a constantly moving universe: auditions, production meetings, signing artists, shaping careers. But after the injury slowed him down, the world he helped create continued moving without pause. Networks made decisions without him. Producers handled tasks he once insisted on reviewing personally. Contestants grew up, succeeded, failed, or disappeared into normal lives. Everything kept progressing, and Simon realized something heartbreaking. He had built an industry so large and so self-sufficient that it no longer needed him in the same way. This realization is one of the quiet tragedies of aging, when the world you once shaped begins to grow beyond your control. The talent shows he built, the formats he invented, and the ideas he popularized still exist, but they have changed. New judges, new producers, new strategies. Younger audiences gravitate toward different styles. The digital era, which once feared him, now moves faster than he ever imagined. Viral moments happen without auditions. Overnight sensations come from live streams rather than studio stages. Simon, who once defined the search for talent, now watches the world redefine it without asking him for permission. And for a man who built his identity around influence, this shift feels painfully heavy. He spent yet reconnecting is difficult when the world has gotten used to your absence. Friends he once called weekly now speak to him occasionally. Some have built their own careers, families, lives, things he often pushed aside for deadlines, auditions, and rehearsals.
Even the artists he discovered, the ones who once depended heavily on him, now navigate their own paths. Some still express gratitude, but gratitude is not the same as closeness. Fame creates distance, and over time, that distance becomes a wall. Another quiet tragedy in Simon's life is the weight of responsibility he still carries. Even when he is not actively producing, he constantly thinks about the contestants whose dreams rise and fall under the structure he created. He knows that not all of them succeed, and some of their failures haunt him more than he admits. While the world often laughs at failed auditions, Simon remembers the faces, the shaky hands, the overwhelmed smiles, the desperate hope. Being the person who says no over 100,000 times in a career is not something that leaves a person untouched. Sometimes, late at night, he replays old audition clips, not the famous ones, but the forgotten ones. Contestants who tried so hard, who believed so deeply, who disappeared from the world's memory the moment the episode ended. To audiences, these were entertainment. But to Simon, they were moments where he had to choose honesty over kindness, ratings over emotions. And those choices leave invisible scars, ones that surface only when life becomes quiet enough. Aging has also forced Simon to face another uncomfortable truth: the industry is not sentimental. For all the shows he created, for all the money he generated, for all the careers he launched, the industry moves forward without hesitation. Meetings happen without him. New executives step in. Formats evolve. And while he is still respected, respect does not stop the clock. It merely slows the fall. In the quieter phases of his life, Simon also struggles with something else: legacy. Not fame, not wealth, not influence, but legacy. The question of what he will leave behind. For years, he believed his legacy was his shows, his artists, his franchises. But now he wonders if that is enough. Success is loud, but legacy is quiet. And the quiet parts of his life are where Simon feels the weight of everything he built and everything he missed. Part of this reflection came from fatherhood. Becoming a father later in life changed him, perhaps more than anything else. His son, Eric, represents a version of life Simon never allowed himself to truly experience when he was younger. The simple joys, the ordinary days, the moments that do not need cameras. Simon cherishes them deeply, but they also remind him of how many years he lived without them. At 65, he tries harder now, attending events, slowing down work, being present. But the fear remains: is it too late to undo decades of absence? This question sits heavily in his mind, forming another part of the tragedy that time creates. Another part of the story is the physical toll that work, stress, and age take on a body. Simon's injuries were not isolated incidents, they were warnings. Signs that even the strongest will eventually weaken.